here with the second part of this data analysis series, shall we call it. And we should do a fun one here. I might ruffle some feathers, but hey, that's how you gotta do it, right, when you make something like this. So we're gonna make I've already made it, spoiler alert, a champ tier list. And I'm gonna try to use some data to justify it. It's this is the tier list for me. I'm not really making one for the other players, but we are gonna look kind of at all the players' data just to see how much of it kind of lines up with my kind of tier list and whatnot. And also, I'm going to link below kind of the video that inspired me to do this particular tier list. It is a pretty fun video with like 3 different really good players. Voyix, I'm sure everybody knows him. Cranberry, probably everybody knows him as well. And Rising Dusk, you should definitely know him if you don't. That guy, I linked it in the last video. I'll link all their channels, but I'm kind of on a Rising Dusk kick right now, shall we say. I'm every single video he posts, I am there the minute it comes up, and I'm just soaking in the knowledge. So, highly recommend all 3 of these guys' channels. They're really informative and fun. And I'll link that tier list video. I don't think my tier list is vastly different from the ones that they did for champs, but I have a few differences, and I'll just explain my justifications for each of them. But before we get into that, let's get a little foreplay here going. I just have a few things I'd like to look at here, which are I've kind of started. So if you look, when I did the first video a month or 2 ago, I was mainly looking at like the individual paths, but I have kind of thought that was not really all that useful, because it's like, if I see the Architect 3, for example, Penumbra has won 10 and lost 5, that might even, it doesn't really take into good account. Like, I have to look separately and see, Architect 2 lost 4. Obviously Architect 2 will never have a win to its name, right? Because I'm just getting like all the iterations here. It'd have to be like, you'd have to get to the 3rd rank of it to even get a win, so it's hard to really look at win rates from this perspective. So the different way I'm looking at the individual paths here, which by the way have nothing really to do, well no, they do have something to do with my tier lists. In my tier lists, I'm like, I rate a champ that doesn't, if a champ only has one good path, it's not going to make S tier in my list. And it honestly will have a hard time making any decent tier if they only have one good path. So I think it is useful to start this out just looking at the paths. But so what I have here instead of that way to look at it is just like a blended way to look at it. What I'm saying here is, I don't care what rank of the champ path it is, just did it exist or not. So like Marsh Lord, it doesn't matter if I went Marsh Lord 1, 2, or 3, just did it exist in the run, and did I win the run or not. So I can actually get an okay look at win rate here, doing it this way. So let's expand this out a little bit. If I can click on that shit. Alright, let's click on it. By the way, this is just my data we're looking at right here. So we can look at it sorting first by just total win count. That means if I've done it a lot, I obviously seem to value it a lot, and if I win with it a lot, it's got to be good. But win rate's a separate thing. Like, I could win with it a lot, but still lose a lot too, which might tell us something. But apparently the path I like the most is Repeater on Echorite. And no surprise here, I generally think it's A, the most fun path, but B, I think it's the most powerful. That may not be true though. We'll get to that in a little bit here. But for the record, I have my most total wins with it. It results in a 60% win rate, which is, a little bit better than the overall. It results in a 63.6% win rate. I should probably sort those columns differently, but that's a 3% increase over my overall Wormkin exiled clan win rate. So, evidence that it's a pretty good path. Spine Chief Corruptor also is second on the list. technically it's slightly lower than my overall non-exiled clan win rate, but I don't pay too much mind to that. To me, it's resulting in a 70% win rate. That's pretty good for me. To suss out that it's technically less than a percent under the overall clan win rate doesn't really mean much to me. I can be pretty confident the Corruptor's pretty good. And then Hornbreaker Brawler, this one's insane. I mean, granted, I have a really good win rate with Hellhorn anyway, so it's still only 8% higher, but it's pretty, 20 and 4 is pretty hard to deny that Brawler is a good Hornbreaker Prince path, right? And then Shardtail Queen, similarly, if I get an Imperialist, usually I'm only taking 1 point of Imperialist if I can help it. 20 and 2, hard to deny the strength of that, right? And then Wildenton Strangler, I don't know. I have trouble figuring out if I should go Strangler or not. I feel like I've had a lot of bad runs of Strangler lately. But then again, historically, since the DLC dropped, it's the one I've done the most. And it's, I guess, right there at my overall win rate for Exiled Awoken. I don't know. I think it's okay. But I think the other paths are probably better, is my guess. Thornlord in particular, I think, needs to be what I target more often lately. Because at the very least, it's a Preserved Thorns. It's, as we know, setup is so important. You can just throw it on a floor you don't care about. You get three free stings, draw basically a full hand turn 2. Even if you never use the champ beyond that, that's better than your average champ provides you. Sorry to say it, but that is just the truth. There are a few champs in this game that can carry. A lot of them can't. Like, Penumbra has a hard time carrying a game, for instance. The best Penumbra path, in my opinion, really is just basically getting you a Space Prism to compare, which is also a good card, but you have to wait until rank 3 to get that, whereas this one you get Preserved Thorns right at rank 1. Blah, 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 though. I don't want to get too hung up in a lot of this. We can look at the diff from win rate. That's saying my win rate with this path compared to the overall clan win rate. Don't really care too much about these low one, like I've only gone Monstrous 2 times. Like, I need more sample size there. Same with Bristling Sentient. Imperialist Sarteo, we've already kind of gone over that. Superfood Primordium, I mean, we know it's good. 90% versus 80%. It's like, both. I'm gonna do good either way. Blah 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 blah. Soul Guard, Titan Channel's good. Dark Calling's good. Shellsmith's good. Conduit is good. It's the one Tethys I'm happy to see. Decayer's great. Cultivating is really good. Now, this is one thing I will like to get into here. Keep in mind, I already show that it seems to be better overall. Now let's look at the opposite. What am I doing pretty bad with? Well, Dire Channel, granted it's only a sample size of 3. I'm pretty adamant here, though. We'll look at every player's in a bit here. I have seen no evidence that Dire Channel is good. And I know this goes against what I was saying in the previous videos, that I generally say I don't look too much at the bad stats. I'm more interested in the good stats. But I think with Dire Channel, there's sort of a conceptual thing here, too. I think it's an absolutely it needs a tweaking. It needs to either be completely changed or the stats need to be changed. Dire Channel is fucking horrible. And I'll try to keep it cool here, but I passionately hate Dire Channel. Like, because there's such a one-to-one comparison that you can make with Titan Channel, right? And Titan Channel to me is just objectively better than Dire Channel. And I see no evidence in any data so far to counteract that statement. And we'll get to that in a second here. Handheld Totem, pretty bad. Doesn't surprise me. My experience with Handheld Totem is that it's pretty good up until Divinity, and then in Divinity it just sucks. It's so easy to die to any amount of spikes, so you already have to kill a Handheld Totem. To get the value out of it, you kind of have to set up bottom. Maybe you can set up mid, but typically bottom. That way you can blast everybody with spell weakness either on the second or third floor. But that gives you less time to find the removal of the spike enchanter, so you basically have to like permafrost some answer there. And even then, like, typically I find if I'm relying on handheld Totem Tethys to kill the bosses, they're all fine up until Divinity, where on Divinity I can't just apply a bunch of spell weakness and then blast them on the second or third floor. I have to blast them on the bottom floor. So it's like, and it's real fucking pain because the bottom floor gets fucking spell shield. So even if you somehow survive the entire fight, keep Tethys alive, keep applying spell shield, you still have to have some piercing on your finisher, right? It's a lot to ask for, and it's just really hard to pull it off. Reaper, I just haven't ran it much. But, you know, so on and so forth. Those are the only real big ones, it seems. There's not really any huge, like, negative win rates. Penumbra Architect, I guess. I don't know. I think Architect is generally the best path, but, you know, I'm 10 and 10 with it. I don't know if there's much to say there. Explosive, though, is probably worth sussing out here. I have always thought Explosive is the best sentient path. I think I'm seeing pretty good data here to say that that's probably not true. And that leads really well into me now switching over to the rest of the player's data. So we'll just look at the data that is not me, and we'll see the vastly different results show up here. So now we can look at total wins real quick. I didn't remove skewed results here. I don't know if I need to remove them here, but you know, we'll look at them real quick. Just obviously the player that really likes to run Rector Flicker and has a very, very good win rate with it, basically 100%, they typically run Dark Calling and Accumulator together. That's really what we're seeing there. But just for the you know, just since I don't necessarily want the skewed results there, let's hide them, just because I do want to show something that I'm particularly interested in here in terms of the sentient, and why I think I've been probably overvaluing Explosive. So once these so right here, Cultivating Path, Sentient, seems like all the other players run it as their main path for Sentient. And even in my data, you saw it, I didn't run it nearly as much as Explosive, but it had a positive, the times I did run Cultivating, it had a positive effect. I guess I overreacted to the nerf that it got, because remember, it was busted, and then they nerfed it so that the additional ranks to Cultivating no longer gave extra draw. It still gets the one draw. But it's pretty hard to deny this data, right? Like 39 and 26, the difference from their overall win rate with a clan, which is 41% on primary non-exiled Awoken, is 60% when going Cultivating on a pretty good sample size. I mean, that's about as good as a sample size as I can get for these type of stats without getting like hundreds and hundreds of players worth of data, right? So I think I've been under-evaluating Cultivating and also over-evaluating Explosive. I think Explosive is still good in the right deck, but I think mainly that would be Wormkin, and also an Incant deck I think it could be pretty good in. But mainly Wormkin, I think I will still run Explosive. All other variants, though, I probably am going to be more looking to find Cultivating. I think it's pretty clear that Cultivating is the ideal sentient path. And then also we see Repeater, not that different from me. Everybody seems to love Repeater. Conduit as well. Marshland's an interesting one. Brawler, Aggressive, that is different from me. I do think Aggressive is the best path. I prefer Superfood from a fun perspective, but hard to deny the aggressive or the aggressive strength there. Strangler, though, maybe Strangler's still good. It seems like Strangler is the winningest path for Wildenton. Not super much, or not a whole lot higher than Predator, but it's up there, right? So on and so forth. Penumbra Architect. It looks like people are running the Care. I don't know if I don't know what's going on there. Corruptor as well, but it seems like it does okay compared to the overall. But I see the Infector probably ran a bit too much, like I said, right? But anyway, let's go to the clan win rate. No huge surprises here. Little Fade is still the, sorry, not clan win rate. Difference from win rate. So Cultivating still number one. If you look at the difference of the win rate going that path to the clan win rate, it is number one. Hard to deny. Aggressive as well. Very good. But the Marsh Lord, this is an interesting one. I kind of thought Marsh Lord is just... I generally only took it if I didn't have a consumable at the start, because it's the only path that has a good ring 1 if there's no consumables. And that was like my criteria to pick Marsh Lord. Pretty hard to deny though, the 33 and 17 here with all the other players. Like it's 13% higher than the overall Wormkin XL win rate for all of them. I mean, it can be pretty good, it looks like. I might have to revisit Marsh Lord. It's tough to go wrong with most of the Icarite paths, right, when you have a consumable. Maybe I need to look more into Marsh Lord, I don't know. I do think it is the best, but like I said, it's the best ring 1 through 3 regardless, I think. Cold Channel, that's an interesting one. I will say recently I think Cold Channel's been performing pretty well for me. It's possible that we've been underrating Cold Channel, right? And so on and so forth. I don't want to get too hung up too long here though, because we do have a tier list to get to here. Real quick, let's just see the negative difference from win rate. It is interesting that Icarus has done so poorly. I don't think Icarus is a bad path, but I will say it's the only... I just never really see myself doing it anymore. Reason being, to me it's just such a free win either way with Endless or Firelight. Why would I take the risk of Icarus? Because Icarus does depend really like on getting the right enemy troops, right? Because let's say you go Icarus and you get Heaven's Priest ring 1. You're not going to get hardly any stacks of spikes. And say you don't get a mark of invasion. So you might get a stack or two if you're lucky. You'll get that second wave crossbowman, but beyond that, are you going to get any stacks? I don't know if you will. You might be lucky to get a second stack. You may not even get the one stack, depending on RNG if your primitive molds being drawn, right? I mean, you probably are getting at least one stack. But, say that you get that, and then it's like Pyre Absorbers next, and again, no Mark of Invasion. Well, pretty hard to really get going at that point, right? If you've taken shards, if it's like Tethys, if it's Talos with the 5 armor to everybody, if you only got stacked twice, you only have 5 spikes, you can't even kill anything in the Talos fight now, and you're screwed. So it's entirely possible you just can't get spikes going. I will say, though, the 3 and 19 seems pretty low. My guess is probably people were testing it out. I know it should win more than that. But I don't know that for certain. That's an assumption. If there's anything I know about data, it's that the only thing you should really assume is that your assumptions are wrong. So who knows? All we can really say is that, yeah, it's 3 and 19. Maybe they were testing, maybe they weren't. Maybe it is bad. I don't know. I don't think it's bad, though. I think people have been generally pretty high on Little Icarus in the DLC. Dire Channel, though, like I said, this is the one exception I'm making to the rule here of me saying that the bad data doesn't necessarily mean something's bad. I'm still holding to it here. I think Dire Channel's bad. I think conceptually it is eclipsed by Titan Channel. The amount of shards you need for it to even get past Titan Channel's damage at all 3 ranks. It's the same story at all 3 ranks. It's a lot of shards, and by then it's kind of negligible, right? And another thing about Dire Channel is you can't use Umbra Stone on it, right? You can't give it trample. You can't use Furnace Tap or One Home's Tome on it. You can't you can't add Multi-Strike to it the way you can with Titan Channel. Also, you can't apply, say, melee weakness to an enemy and have it benefit from that. There's really no benefit of Dire Channel over Titan Channel. And also, you can't tank with it like you can with Titan Channel. You can't go top and cheat out the Ember Drain with it. There's just no fucking way that Dire Channel is better than Titan Channel. That's the one thing I'll hold to here. It needs a change. There needs to be like an innate trample or something added to Dire Channel to make it worth it. And like I said, you see here, I have a lot of good players' data, and I just don't see any evidence that it's good. But I'm always willing to be proven wrong. Even though I made a pretty hard statement that I think Dire Channel's bad, if somebody, like I said, gabriotgaming@gmail.com, send in your run data. I will run it. I'll give you a report on it, and I'll add it to the meta-analysis. I want to do another one of these with more data even. I would always love to be proven wrong. That just means I can learn something new about the game. Maybe there's something I'm completely missing with Dire Channel. But as it stands, I think Dire Channel is completely crap. But so on and so forth here. When beyond those first two, I don't care too much if it's like 5% lower than the win rate. That doesn't really tell me that there's much bad going on there. That's pretty close to the overall win rate, so I'm not really thinking much there. Now, that took a lot longer than I thought it would, 20 minutes, but let's get to the part you came here for, which is the tier list. Well, let's just go to the tier list, right? So this is my tier list. And I'm going to do it a little bit different than the other videos have done. They usually kind of start with an empty list and go through each champ and place them in. I already kind of have determined my tier list, and I'd like to just work backwards from there and justify it. And so I will say, Primordium originally I had at A tier instead of S. And here's my thought between Little Fade. I always knew was going to be S. My original plan was that Little Fade would just be the only thing in S, because to me, Little Fade is the only champ that, well, Spine Chief is similar, but it's the only champ where it's like, it's such a free win with two of the paths, and you're always going to be guaranteed to have one of them. So Endless is like a free win, and Firelight is a free win, in my opinion. And it doesn't take much of any, like, Endless will be good regardless of what your deck is. Firelight might have a bad ring 1 if you didn't have additional Reform or Burnout extension, but that's about it. Beyond that, Firelight really, it just doesn't matter what's going on. Like, I've had good luck with it with exiled imps as a secondary, for example, which should make sense, right? Those should be a liability. And there's not really that much in the Hellhorn banner unit that works particularly that well with Firelight, but it's still just wrecks face, right? So to me, it was like Little Fade seemed like it would be the only one in the S tier, because I couldn't say that with Primordium, right? Because we know aggressive will always be good. But to me, it's the only guaranteed good path. Superfood needs moving parts for it to be good, and even I would even argue that Superfood, particularly with the Stygian as secondary, really doesn't have any benefits there outside of the normal Umbra cards that might combo well with it. So with Stygian in particular, if you don't get aggressive at the start, and let's even give a further specific example. Let's say your Stygian secondary, you don't have aggressive at the start, and Seraph the Temperate is your Seraph. Pretty hard for you to feel good about taking Superfood or Stalwart there, right? Both aren't going to give you that much value. You could have a bad run there. So that's why I was like, it seems like Primordium isn't on the same level then. But then we go back to the data. This is my data, by the way. And when I sort here, the way I'm looking at this is I'm looking at the same like exiled clan or non-exiled variant, and I'm doing a difference from primary to secondary, because my thought here, this obviously isn't a foolproof method, but my thought here is like Umbra primary, the only difference between using it as a primary and a secondary, it has the same basic card, Plinks, has the same possibilities for the deck. The only difference really would be that this has the champ and this doesn't have the champ, right? Now, obviously, that's not a foolproof method. There's, your primary clan at the start of the game does get an uncommon. There's stuff like that. But for the most part, I think it's generally a good comparison to make. So when I make that comparison, I see that, Plinks as a secondary compared to having Primordium as your primary, 22% difference in win rate. Plinks secondary for me has 57% win rate, but primary Primordium has 80% win rate. Hard to deny that gigantic difference there, which just goes to show how powerful that the champ is. And now, I guess the two things I look at here to kind of sway, I start basically from my point of bias, right? What I just think of these champs from a conceptual level. But then I overlay the data on top to maybe influence maybe a jump up or a jump down in either direction from where I originally had it. So Primordium, I think, goes to S because both there's that difference of 22%, but also the overall primary win rate is high, right? If I sort by primary win rate, it's also right there tied at highest with Little Fade. So, and they even, Little Fade's third when I sort by the primary to second difference. So I think there's a pretty good justification to me as those having a clear advantage over all the other champs. I think they're also just generally easy to play. I don't think there's much complicated play that needs to happen there. So that's why I got those two at the top. And that's not very different from the other players, right? When Voyix, Rising Dust, and Cranberry did theirs, I think all of them more or less had that. But I think where I might start to diverge a bit here is maybe here, like Spine Chief. For me, Spine Chief is fourth on the list for primary to secondary diff. I have a 59% with Fractures as a secondary versus 71% as Spine Chief as a primary. And really, these four here, there's a big gap after this, right? After this, it's 0, then it's all negatives past that. So to me, it was hard for me. Like, I even considered putting Spine Chief in the S tier. He's almost like an A+ tier. Because along with that difference, he also just has a really good overall win rate at 71%. But I figured 71% was maybe a step lower than 80%. And just from a... I also... now we'll switch over to here, which is the same comparison, but I'm doing this when I'm not involved, right? And I'm hiding the skew too, just so Rector doesn't show up like amazing super at the top here. So if I sort by the primary to second diff here, and I know I said this is just me, but I do want to take a little bit into account how just the general public does here as well. I don't see the same story here with Spine Chief, right? It's the exact opposite almost. Granted, there's no huge... wait, is that sorting? Right, let me rerun this. It's like frozen or something. But yeah, this is the other players that we're looking at right here. So when I sort that way, I see the same story with Primordium and Little Fade, but I don't see it with Spine Chief. With Spine Chief, it's actually a little worse. But along with being a little worse, it just has one of the lowest primary win rates. It's actually second lowest on overall win rate for all the other players. So I think what that told me is, with it being a little bit lower on primary win rate on mine, about 9% lower, combined with the fact that the general public just doesn't really seem to do super well with Spine Chief, it seemed appropriate to have it on A instead of S tier. But I still thought, it's kind of separated from the rest. Past that, in my, conceptually to me, Spine Chief is very similar to these two, where you're always going to get Corruptor or Decayer at the start. and those are amazing paths, and it really doesn't take much specific things in the deck to make that work, if you know what you're doing. I think one of the biggest problems I see with players is they take non-infused cards just because they're good. That's really, this will all come out in my upcoming Wormkin guide. I think it's just wrong. I think you really have to have a good reason not to take an infused card, shall we say, when you're playing Wormkin, if you really are utilizing Wormkin for what they're worth. But that's, we'll get into all that probably at another time. Let's just keep going down the list here. So now we have the significant drop off in my data here of having a difference of the primary to secondary, and with the next on my list here is Echorite, who is literally even with primary to secondary. And I've kind of said my thoughts a few times on Echorite. I think it's B tier. I wouldn't list it the same as Spine Chief, because to me, Echorite can have the occasional run that is rough. The occasional run where he doesn't do too much. Ring 1, as I said, if you don't get Martial Lord and you don't get any consumables, it's a rough Ring 1. It's a 2-pip unit that either has 25 in stats and does nothing else, or 25 and 5 in stats, does nothing else. Or it's a 2-pip unit that is 15 and 15 in stats and does nothing else. Depending on your starting cards, you could have a really fucking bad time Ring 1, and you could lose. It's never going to be unbeatable, right? There's no such thing as an unbeatable seed, but in a no reload situation, you just might make the wrong call, and you did. Beyond that as well, you might just not, let's say you go Martial Lord, you commit to Martial Lord, and you just don't get offered an egg. Well, that's not too good of a situation either, right? You could then flex into Shellsmith or flex into Repeater, but even then you're not, you may just not end up with that much going on that run. Granted, full Martial Lord's still fine. I just think it's kind of lackluster if you don't have additional eggs to really make use of that benefit. But that's just me. I still like Echorite. I think it's a fun champ. I do think it's a powerful champ. But for me, to be S or A tier, you need 100% consistency. And that's what I feel I get from those champs. I don't get 100% consistency from anything I've listed here at B tier and below. The swinginess is there. I find all of these champs have a certain degree of swinginess and no real guaranteed value. Which I guess may not be true of Rector. Rector is a hard one for me to evaluate, because if you go back here, there's 4 champs actually that are in this sort of grouping here of having a significant positive difference from primary to secondary, and Rector's in there. It's actually second on my list, 12.6%, 54% to the 42% win rate. And here's what I do think. I do think eventually, as I get better with Rector, I couldn't in good faith put him in A and S, and the reason for that is because I still only have a 50% win rate with Rector as my primary. That's why in good faith I couldn't put him in A or S. I'll tell you what though, as I get better with Rector, and I do see myself getting better with Rector, I think he'll move to A in my list. I think that's the one thing I do see is he'll go to A and maybe even S. It's possible he'll go to S, because I will say, let's, we can remove, well, you'll just have to take my word on this. I don't really want to go through and remove it, but if I'm removing the skewed results here for the overall players' results here. If I didn't remove that, the number 1 here would be Rector. So if I know a player in this game can do so damn good with Rector, I can't argue with it being at S. It's just for me right now, I can't put it at S until I get to that level. But it very well is worthy of S, is Rector Flicker. I can totally see that being justified, right? So let's see, we've kind of gone over Echorite and Rector Flicker there. I mean, I should also say conceptuals about Rector. It really does, a lot of the time you're able to start Dark Calling, which really opens up the entire the entire Melting Remnant game plan. It allows you to know that you're going to be able to take Draft pretty comfortably. You can take Paraffin Enforcer pretty comfortably. You'll have, at the very least, you'll have some form of scaling. It really opens up the entire game plan. I really like a Dark Calling start. I suppose where I don't really love Rector right now is the Harvest or Burnout paths. Burnout obviously requires specific cards to make work, and even then it's not insanely good. The ceiling's pretty low there. I guess it has an okay floor. It'll be a nice body that can tank and can do some damage, but it doesn't do much beyond that. The Burn Bite path doesn't. And the Harvest path, it's hard for me to deny that it's probably very good, because some very good players talk it up. Rising Dusk, for example, is pretty big on Harvest path. Hard to deny a 100% win rate player is talking the path up. It's hard to say that the path is not good, right? But it's just my experience with it hasn't been super great, like full Harvest, I should say. Because to me, what it provides, the full Harvest path, is just a lot of health. And to me, the clan already has Molten Encasement. It already has a lot of Dazed. It already has Reform if you find it. And it already has Engulfed in Smoke. That's a lot of survivability, right? So I feel like I just often don't need what Harvest provides. I don't find Harvest provides what I often lack, which is Wave Clear. I don't find the offensive scaling very good on it, but clearly it is good, and I just need to figure out how to utilize it a bit more. And I will say, when I analyze the data of the people doing very good with Rector, they don't really go Burn Bright. It's mainly Dark Calling and mainly Harvest. And a lot of the times it's a combo of the two, because Dark Calling doesn't gain huge benefit from going additional ranks into it. So usually, like, the ideal path, similar to like Shardtail Queen has an ideal path, in my opinion, of Imp Parade 2, Imperialist 1. I think the ideal path of Rector is Dark Calling 1, Harvest 2. But, all that being said, I think I'll get better with Rector, and as I learn him more and more, he'll probably move up. Shardtail's a tough one for me to evaluate. I really wanted to put her at the A tier, but here's the problem. When I look at the data, she's actually my second worst in terms of the difference of win rate between primary and secondary. But here's the thing, like, secondary, keep in mind it's my best secondary, right? So that's one thing you got to factor in. It's going to be hard to like compare to my best secondary. And even when I sort by primary, it is, tied for my third best on overall win rate of primary. So it's like, even though it's second worst on the difference of secondary and primary, it's hard to deny that it is still just pretty good. Like, there's obviously some variance going on there. And it's almost apples to oranges when really what I'm looking at is I'm comparing one high win rate to another high win rate. So to me, it's pretty good. Startail Queen is. From a conceptual level, I find that she always provides some amount of value. It's just maybe her ceiling isn't quite there. Like, she can carry a run, but she doesn't typically carry a run, I guess is my thing with her. She's typically, what I'm doing with her is I'm just getting free wave clear with her. As I said, Imperialist 2, or Imperialist 1, Imp Parade 2 is my ideal path with her. I'm getting free fledgling imps every turn, and I'm getting a free, 10 to 20 to 30 damage of the entire floor per turn with her, at no cost to draw and at no cost to my Ember, is what I'm getting there with that. And I have the flexibility of putting, additional imps for free on that floor. I have the flexibility to just put the fledgling imp that it spawns on a different floor to scale it. It's a pretty flexible, pretty low investment type champ to me. So to me, I've always liked her for that. But I guess, there is the argument that sometimes she really doesn't do much. Let's say I don't get either Imperialist or even Imp Parade. Like, if I get stuck in it, like, I really don't think the rally path is very good anymore. I used to like it in pre-DLC, but I think for similar reasons that, like, Gorge Penumbra is pretty weak. We'll get into that later. Just a single striking unit just typically isn't that good, I guess. In the DLC, when you have to deal with Divinity waves that have fucking, like, 3 to 5 tanks, like, 3 dedicated tanks, and between the armor gain and whatnot, the other little units end up turning into pseudo-tanks. So, like, who cares if I have one unit that strikes one time really big? Like, I kind of need, like, multi-strike application or trample application at that point to really make it work. Let's see, what else? But anyway, so one path I don't really like, which is the rally path. But also sometimes I can't really flex both of them together. Like, I might just get stuck Imperialist 3 or even Imp Parade 3, which are not bad paths, really. But they're maybe a little more inconsistent in what they can provide. So I ended up with Shardtail Queen at the B tier just because she doesn't typically carry a run. But I do think her floor is pretty high. Sometimes I just don't really use her. It happens. But for the most part, I think I generally find a decent amount of value out of her. And I think it's a similar story for Solgard. I think 2 paths are pretty good. Titan Channel is always going to be good. Cold Channel situationally is good. So, 1/3 of the time you won't get Titan Channel offered at the start. And that's where her inconsistencies come in. I think Titan Channel is a guaranteed good run. Just go full Titan Channel, you get a 200 in health, 200 damage unit. That's going to be good, and it should not be hard for you to set up top. You also don't have to deal with turn 2 Ember Drain. That's worth giving it a positive for. It's basically a pseudo Ember upgrade if you think about it, because turn 2 is very important. If you can cheat out the Ember Drain, that's significant. So Titan Channel gives you that. But also, like, you really should be setting up top with it, and you should be able to unlock it by that 3rd turn, or so when the first wave meets you. And even if you don't, you should be able to do it at least the turn after. Maybe you leak that first wave a little bit. It's not the end of the world if that happens now and then. Generally, I think the people that struggle with Titan Channel just don't really know how to properly lean into incant. Like, you need draw upgrades. You need to not be, like, over removing your Forgotten Powers if you don't have a lot of 0 costs in your deck. You need 0 costs, and you need draw. That's what you need for an incant deck. Even if the spell sucks, if it costs 0 and it doesn't require a target, it's a good spell to add to an incant deck. But we can't get too bogged down on, like, specific strategies. I do think Dire Channel is one of the most useless paths in the game, so she has that going against her. And Cold Channel can be inconsistent. I do think Cold Channel's a lot better than we've given it credit for, though. It can absolutely still carry a game if you have the proper support for it. Mainly, like, defense, right? And a lot of shards. Even against Divinity, it can carry, as long as you're keeping it alive and giving it a lot of shards. It will clear out every wave, and if it clears out every wave, it's gonna clear out Relentless, right? But sometimes it just doesn't work. Some combos have a tougher time with it as well. Like, I don't think Melting particularly has anything good for Cold Channel. Melting can struggle with it. But even in the runs where Cold Channel kind of just doesn't do much, it'll still be a shitty Titan Sentry at the very worst, right? Which is not a bad thing. You can still clear out a few backliners, maybe in wave 1 and wave 2, and put a little bit of damage on those tanks. And I'd hate to say it, but that's more than you can say for the low roll situations of every champ in the C and D tier. So I really do think she has an edge, or he, I think Solgard's a he, has an edge over everything I've listed in C and D. Other than maybe Sentient, because I think right now, we'll get to Sentient in a bit here, but I think Solgard's pretty good. I wouldn't even be surprised if Solgard eventually makes its way into the A tier for me. But that's the B tier then. So now we get to the C tier. I feel like with the B tier, they have different reasons for being in B tier, but generally it's like they either lack ceiling or they lack floor. With C tier, I think they all have a bad floor, other than maybe Sentient. Actually, no, I take that back. I think Sentient has a pretty bad floor, but we'll get into that. I think everything at C and D tier has a very bad floor, and even the ceiling is questionable on a lot of these. Like, I don't think Penumbra has that high of a ceiling, typically. Like, in a very specific sense, it might have, like, Gorge Penumbra could have a high ceiling if you have the Dream Deck, but the Dream Deck often doesn't happen. So you have to look at what you're really getting on average from these champs. And real quick, we'll go back and look at the data here. At this point, like, you know, wait, no, that's the wrong one. That is, yeah, we gotta look at my data really to really correlate it to mine. Now, granted, I think the lowest on here is Sentient. I went over this at the beginning of the video. I think a lot of this is that I've been doing explosive too much and I've not been doing cultivating enough. I still think spikes is bad, and then I think explosive must be bad outside of Wormkin and Stygian. So that's two bad paths, and it's pretty hard for me to say that I can rank it any higher than C. But, you know, maybe cultivating is actually so good, because remember, when we looked back at that other data, cultivating was the best path of any champ when you looked at the other players' data. So I could see the argument that while there is two pretty bad paths, maybe the one path is so good that it doesn't really justify a C tier, and I could probably move it up to B tier. I don't think I'll ever put it in A and S. I do think that A and S require at least two good paths to be present. But I think if Sentient has one path that is so good, it could probably pull it up to B. But I can't in good faith do that yet, because I have actually performed so poorly with Sentient in comparison to, you know, restores. There's also the fact that my restores seem abnormally high as a secondary win rate, so that's also factoring in here. For some reason, I do like this. What is that? The third best of any secondary is restores for me. It doesn't make much sense, but that is how it's been. You know, it's kind of weird. But again, you know, we go back here and it's the lowest there. So, you know, conceptually, I don't think spikes is very good at all. I don't think that explosive fits a lot of the time, but cultivating is pretty good. I'll give it that. If you can go full cultivating, you know, you get a 3/3 of scaling, which I guess is good. I've been maybe underrating what that provides, but really, you know, you get a draw upgrade at the very least, and you get a big, like, 160 health tank that's only 2 pip. That's a pretty good deal. But that's my thoughts on Sentient. Penumbra, I don't know, like, Architect is usually what I default to. I don't think Architect is really all that good. Like I said, it's like rank 1, it's a 1 pip. It's just like basically like a Tethys that is maybe, it's like a 20 damage, 20 health unit. I think there's a 25 on one of those ends. I forget which, but it's essentially a 1 pip unit, because you play it at 3 pip, it gives you 2 pip back. It's not that great, but it's okay. And then by rank 2, it's pip neutral. By rank 3, it actually gains you a pip. And it has okay stats. But it's not that insane. The ceiling is just not there. I guess the ceiling would be that you're like dying and bringing it back. Like Hollowed Halls is probably the ceiling. Then you can fit a bunch of big fat units on a floor eventually. But generally, I don't think you're finding that much. I think generally all you're getting is an okay statted, like, unit that basically at rank 3 represents a space prism, which is okay, but that's the best I can hope for from it. Typically, Monstrous just doesn't have enough. Like, it just, you have to take at least 1 pip upgrade to go full Monstrous, which is kind of bullshit. It's not like you can add a shrink it down to 1 pip like you can with other similar large pip units. Like at least like with the Shadow Siege, I could shrink it down to a pip, or I could even Sketches of Salvation it. Can't do that with Monstrous Penumbra. You gotta play it, you gotta have the pip for it. And even then, the stats just aren't there anymore. It used to be that it would delete floors in the original game, but good luck deleting a floor of 2 overcharged tanks sharded up with a Wiltwing in front and a shard spike channeler in back and like another spear dude. Good luck having Trampler take care of that, or even put a dent in it, you know? Monstrous Penumbra. Good luck having it survive, and good luck fitting anything else on the floor. I don't think Monstrous is very good, and I don't think Gorge is very good. It has probably the best early game of all of them. If you need something to just get you through the early game, I can see that argument, and then you just forget about the champ after that. The problem with Gorge is it could be relevant. I've had runs where it carried for me, but it needs Umbra Stone, or it needs Furnace Tap. Even a single Furnace Tap is arguably not enough. Like I said, there's usually 3 to 4 tanks on or 5, like on a floor in Divinity, and you need to strike them all if it's really gonna be your carry. And again, on top of that, you run into the problem, it's a 3-pip unit that gorges, so you're not fitting anything else on the floor. You also run into the other problems that Divinity presents you with morsels. Like, you can't sit up top unless you have like Feast on holdover, or Shroud Spike on holdover, or like artifact that gives your morsels damage shield, or a plethora of Dazed. Like, you need something of that, or you can't set up top, and then you got to set up mid or bottom, which, considering outside of, as we said, Feast or Shroud Spike, you're not going to be able to feed, like the Gorge happens at the end of the turn, so setting up mid and bottom is even more devastating, right? So there's just so many problems with Gorge Penumbra. That's why I feel, I almost put Penumbra in the D. I guess the reason I didn't is, when I look at Penumbra, which is right here, non-exiled, yeah, it's a 7% lower, but overall win rate, if I compare it to Tethys, like, it still is at least 55, where Tethys is 38 for me. Felt wrong for me to have anything share a spot with Tethys, because Tethys is its own league of shit, as far as I'm concerned. But that's Penumbra. Hornbreaker Prince, it's a tough one. I could see it eventually coming to B for me, but with the current data, I don't know that it was, you know, technically I guess in the mix here, but I don't know. I could probably even put it into B now. I think in practice what I've noticed is I often just don't use this champ unless it's full brawler, and even if it is full brawler, it's not guaranteed to give me value. I think as I try out Reaper and Wrathful more, maybe I can make it work more. I just find so many times Hornbreaker Prince is a throwaway for me, because let's even say Brawler, let's say I do get value out of it at the 3rd rank. That's the only rank it's really good at. Rank 1, it is just a single multi-strike with horrible base stats. Now, if I'm lucky enough to start with offensive scaling in the opener, it'll be an okay ring 1, but otherwise it's going to be a horrible ring 1. And even if I have a good ring 1 with it, it's like, let's say I find, you know, Horned Warrior is a pretty common banner unit for me to pick up, and it kind of is just better than Hornbreaker Prince even early on. I can add 25 health to it, I can add quick to it, I can add an additional multi-strike to it, I can even add a large stone to it, get it nice stats, you know, I can give it a good infusion. All of these things just already push it past the value that Hornbreaker Prince Brawler 1 gives me. And if I'm using some spell, like single target spells as my scaling, like Ritual Battle is a pretty common one, at that point I'm just going to start putting it on Horn Warrior, and I'm going to forget about Prince. Prince is going to be a completely useless, zero value giving me champ, which is not good. feels very C to D tier for me at that point. And that's a common situation. So that's kind of why I think Hornbreaker makes the C tier for me. And Wildington, I don't know. This is a tough one for me to evaluate. I just don't feel good about Wildington. Technically, it's middle of the road in terms of primary to secondary difference. It also has a decent win rate, but I mean, that's because root seeds are there, right? Root seeds are good, and my root seeds aren't even necessarily as high as they should be. I have a weird anomaly with my restores versus root seeds. If we go to the other players' data, it's weird because even in their data, so in their data, it's actually the worst in terms of comparison there. So that's pretty telling of it as well, right? Wildington is the lowest, but still, its overall primary win rate is 4th highest. So that could just mean root seeds are that good, right? As a secondary, root seeds are the top when you look at all the players. This is all the other players, by the way, not my data. And I don't know. I could see arguments for it still being like B tier. I just really hate this unit right now, and I can't in good faith bring it to B. It's one of those units where it's like, it takes up 3 pip, so even the Predator path is questionable. You really need overstacking, I feel, to really utilize it, or some sort of pip manipulation like Space Prisms or Manual of the World or whatever the artifact's called that gives 3 pip to a random floor. Or like a Sketches and then like a way to move Wildington onto the floor. That works too. Otherwise, it's like the Predator path is often iffy to me. It doesn't have good base stats. Similar to Brawler, if my path is to go full Predator, it takes all the way till rank 3 till I can really justify like pouring a bunch of like making that unit my carry. Also, Thornlord to me is like actually the best path. As I said, similar to like Architect Penumbra is basically a Space Prism. Well, Thornlord Wildington is basically a Preserved Thorns. Even if you don't use the unit, you get to put in some chip damage at the start while drawing a full hand turn 2. That's always going to provide good value. So the floor for Thornlord is actually decent in that regard. You don't get that type of floor with Hornbreaker. And then also, Strangler path is hard for me to evaluate. I've always thought it was the best path historically, but I've had such bad runs with it, particularly in the last month, that I'm scared to take it. But the data does show with both the players' data and my data that there's a lot of wins attributed to Strangler, so maybe Strangler is still good, and I need to stop shying away from it, just based on a few horrible runs I had with it. The problem with it is it can really... It's like you have to commit to Strangler. You have to commit to building a floor around this 3 pip unit that doesn't do much other than root the floor, right? It's a tough thing with Strangler. Now, obviously, sometimes you can flex in Predator and it will be okay. But what if you don't get Predator, then probably you're looking at either a full Strangler because you either didn't take Thornlord rank 2 because you wanted to hold out at the chance at Predator and just never find it, or you just say fuck it, I'll take Thornlord so I know I get a little bit better stats and I do get those stings. That works too, but even then it's a liability having the Strangler. At that point you can't use Wildington as just a Preserved Thorns because it has Strangler, and if it survives, it probably will survive at least a wave or 2. It will root the floor, and then that floor will just pile up, and your floor probably can't handle this gigantic floor that eventually comes to it. So, I don't know. It's tough. I don't think Wildington's very good. I think for 3 pip it just doesn't do enough. It doesn't really provide scaling. It just provides an effect, and that effect, you know, you only have a few pip to really make your other units on the floor shine. So usually you need to overstack to really make it work. And then at the very bottom, last but least, we have Tethys. I don't know, Tethys. It's so weird because Tethys was my best champ prior to the DLC. And I don't necessarily think objectively she's bad. Like I said, there are good players that sent me data, and Tethys was their best champ. So clearly I have lost something with her. And like I said, I ran Tethys Dregs a lot, which is a bad combo. So maybe this is skewed, but I will say in general, with all combos, I've had very inconsistent results with her. I think before it was like Chillwind was a really good path. I could rely on it to like kill tanks and kill bosses. I can't rely on it to do either of that anymore. It's the best ring 1 that I can get. Like if I want a ring 1 that's not going to suck, Chillwind's my best bet. Conduit's pretty reliant on getting like a Crypt Builder or a Crystallis. If I don't get either of those, I'll have a rough time with Conduit. Similar story with like if you with the spell weakness variant. You can just have really bad starts. Some of the worst starts in the game are when you don't get offered Chillwind at the start and you don't have any heavy hitting spells. That is an abysmal ring 1 situation to be in, and it's really tough. Maybe even worse than the Echo Right no consume start. But, you know, a lot of times Conduit can be insane. You can set up insane in-camp floors with Conduit. And, I don't know, I don't think too much of the spell weakness path, but I will say other players, I didn't see evidence that it was super good, but I also didn't see evidence that it was super bad. Like, they seem pretty middle of the road with the spell weakness. I think that's usually, though, them just flexing it in, like maybe as a, because they didn't need all the ranks of Conduit or all the ranks of Chillwind, right? But yeah, Tethys is pretty bad for me. If we go back to my data, it is 3rd lowest on the difference of primary to secondary, and that's already with comparing it to my 2nd worst secondary, right? And primary wise, it's by far my worst. Like everything primary is above 50% all the way up to 80% for me, but Tethys is down there at 38%. So how could I not put Tethys at D for my data? So I don't know. That is the long drawn out reason for why my tier list is the way it is currently. I could see Tethys maybe moving up eventually. I could see Sentient moving up. Maybe Prince and Wildenton move up. Flicker definitely I think will move up. Echo might move up. I still stand by my reasoning there though that like it has low roll potential, but maybe the high roll potential is so good that it will just eventually move up. Soulguard might move up, especially if they change Dire Channel. That obviously could change. I don't foresee Fade or Primordium moving down. I think Spine Chief might get into S eventually. I'm just hoping everybody moves up and nobody moves down. Honestly, Penumbra might move down though. I don't really see much hope for Penumbra. Sentient I think moves up, but yeah. Blah 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 blah, that's it. I have talked my ass off today. That's probably going to be the only 2 videos I put out today. We're going to get into like banner units I think next, but my voice is kind of given out, so I think I need to give myself some rest here. We'll get into infusions, banner units, and upgrades. The card upgrades could be fun, and just generally this like the spells as well. Just kind of everything card related that we haven't gone over is probably what we have to go over next, and also probably worth at least going over like the enemy troops, like for me, and also the other players where we're dying the most. So that'll do it for this one. Hopefully that was useful. If you have any massive disagreements with my logic or my placements here, bring them on. That's the fun discussion, right? Let's talk about why I'm wrong or why I'm right. Anyway, as always, thanks for watching. Until next time, peace.